Hey, it's Central Valley Business. I'm your host, Steve Walling. My guest for this segment is Kevin Little. He is a civil rights attorney. He's been with me before. And Kevin, welcome back to the show. Glad to see you.
Good to see you again.
You know, we were talking beforehand. There's civil rights covers a lot of areas, but let's talk about today. If an individual has their encounter with law enforcement, what are the levels of engagement? When does things get out of hand, and what's the response that a party should have in that, particular incidents?
Okay. Well, I'm happy to talk about that. It's crucial to understand the rules of engagement, so to speak, when you're dealing with the police.
Exactly.
Okay. First and foremost, unless you are being detained or arrested, you do not have to engage the police. You can voluntarily choose to cooperate and speak to the police, as many citizens do, but you do not have to. So if you feel like your safety might be at risk, if the situation is, you're worried that it doesn't look right, you can just say, I'm sorry, I don't consent to contact right now.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Is it important that the individual involved make that particular statement, I don't consent? Or is the understanding that if they don't offer it, there is no consent?
Well, the understanding should be if you don't offer it, there is no consent. But clear communication is always preferable to ambiguity.
Right.
And someone might imply something untoward or erroneous if you simply just walk on by. Maybe they'll think you didn't hear them. Maybe they'll think that you're absconding. Right. So it would be better to say, I'm sorry, I don't consent to any contact unless I'm detained or arrested. I'm choosing to go on my way.
Okay. Now an individual makes that statement.
Right.
What do they need to know? Because sometimes people make that statement and then they say things afterwards.
Right.
What do they need to know? Once we've made that statement, we just zip it, or, is there some communication that is within the context of it's okay to have this part of the conversation without me giving up my rights? Or, as an individual involved in this, where do I stand?
What we always tell our clients and prospective clients is you rarely have anything to gain if you're the subject of an investigation by speaking with the police outside of the presence of an attorney. Number one, officers are allowed to be dishonest with you. They can use various means of psychological tactics or other techniques to get you to talk. It's rarely in your best interest to talk, so just simple rule of thumb is if you're not under arrest, choose voluntarily not to have contact, and if you are arrested, say that I invoke my right against self-incrimination and I choose to remain silent.
Okay, Kevin, we're in this situation. Things begin to escalate. As a citizen, what is it that I'm looking for? What puts me in my best perspective? And when the officers and I'm not casting dispersions on law enforcement, but sometimes things get out of control. What is that level of engagement? Where does that go? Okay.
Well, in terms of when you are engaged with the police, whether you are being detained or arrested, please comply fully. You save your arguments for court or for some other proceeding.
Right.
Do not argue with the police in the field. They are there to do a job, and your actions can very easily be misconstrued. Moreover, any time that you challenge the authority of the police, you potentially subject yourself to arrest for delaying or obstructing a police officer, so you want to avoid that. What we always tell people is if you have an issue with the police action against you, deal with it in court. Don't try to deal with it in the street. The street is not the place to challenge the way you're being addressed by the police.
Okay. And you specialize in these types of cases when you're dealing with, people that have been arrested, right?
That is correct. We do. I've been handling civil rights cases of various types since 1993.
So you got a few miles under your.
I do. I do.
How important are the how is the role of an attorney in the civil rights of our society in general?
It's essential.
Yeah.
The Constitution, we're one of the few countries that actually has a law that allows citizens to enforce their constitutional rights in court. We here in the United States take that for granted, but there's a handful of countries where you can actually enforce the Constitution as a citizen against a public entity or against a public official such as a police officer. It's essential to a free society that the Constitution be enforced, and the only way that is enforced is if you get a civil rights attorney. Otherwise, the Constitution is just a piece of paper.
Very good. You know, and you said something. When you get a civil rights attorney, how many people have you run into that have felt that they could, promote their civil rights as a citizen and end up, creating more of a problem for themselves than...
That's all too often the case. Back to what Mark Twain used to say, if you're representing yourself, you've got a fool for a client. Unless the civil rights law is a very complicated area of the law, do not assume that you know the law well enough to represent yourself. Just remain silent, remain cooperative, and then the very first opportunity you have, consult with someone who knows the law so that you can determine whether or not your rights have been violated.
And Kevin, the last thing I want to ask you regarding this is, what about the citizen that feels threatened in a confrontation with law enforcement? What would you tell that person?
What I would tell that person is, understand that the police are trained to respond to indications of a threat. So, first of all, give you an example. If you feel threatened, let's say you're being pulled over by the police.
Right.
Eliminate any illusion of a threat. Turn your dome light on. Keep your hands where they can be seen. Don't challenge, don't try to argue with the police. Unless you are asked to step out of your car, don't step out of your car. Also, let them know right away if you do have something dangerous in your car. So many of us are, some of us, I should say, do have a right to carry a concealed weapon. If
Right.
you have a concealed weapon in the car, let the officer know that right away.
Okay. That's all really good information, Kevin. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
These are interesting times, and being able to have a little bit of knowledge when you're in that type of situation becomes very important.
It is very important, and the goal is, we've seen too many citizens killed, particularly in the last several years, and I think it's, number one, we need to have a better dialogue between the police and the public that they serve, but number
Absolutely.
two, you have to understand the rules of engagement so you can stay as safe as possible.
Very important. Kevin, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Before we go, you moved into a new office.
I sure did. We moved into the old Ohanessian home. It's at 1225 East Divisadero. It's been now fully remodeled. We have a great facility there. It's 3 stories. We've got our own practice courtroom. We've got mediation facilities. We've got 3 attorneys, 5 support staff, and lots of room to grow. And if anybody wants to come by, we'd be happy to give you a tour.
Very good. Again, thanks for being on the show, Kevin.
Thank you.
We'll see you again with more good information, I'm sure.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care, and we'll see you when we come back.